Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who helped shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, a gem of an archive located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in Midtown. The Memphis Material website and archive were both designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for our shows, but if we did, today's episode, the first of two interviews with Michael Roy, aka Birdcap, today's episode would be sponsored by being around awesome people. For me, the thing that comes up again and again in this interview with Michael is how he was able to surround himself with these wonderful, beautiful people that inspired him and motivated him and complemented his abilities. Complement, Complement, his abilities, and was so important for his formation. Again, this is the first of two interviews that I did with Michael Roy, aka Birdcap. This interview was recorded on December 20th, 2024. Enjoy the episode. What's your earliest memory of art as a kid?
Earliest memory of art as a kid. I remember drawing like creative castles when I was very young, where you just build boxes on boxes and then micro narratives of like a dragon's here and the princess is falling from here, and but I remember those, and I remember drawing my own iterations of Ninja Turtles, but that was like very much my hand drawing. The most inspired I was to draw, my mom used to buy me these VHSs from like mail order commercials, but they were for Bill Cosby's picture pages.
Oh yeah.
And I had my own like Mortimer pen. When it didn't make the noise, but his made the noise. And yeah, it's not the like greatest icon to now like reflect upon, but picture pages was, I think, pretty essential to me having focused art time when I was really young.
Okay, so let's back up just a little bit. So now, where was this? Where were you growing up?
I was born in Singing River Hospital in Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Okay.
And grew up in Escataba, Mississippi, which is a designated census area between towns.
Okay. Now, what was the setup like there at the house? Siblings, other family?
My mom married when I was probably like 5 or 6 to the man who adopted me, and I've called father my whole life. But so in the very early life, we were alone, and when we moved in with him, we eventually like stopped renting a place and had our own trailer that was on one of his employer's land. And in that trailer, I ended up getting a little brother and little sister from the new marriage. And he had an older son named JJ. And so he came with the package, but he was out of the house pretty early because there was a pretty big age gulf between us. So he had already moved out after, it seemed like we lived together a couple years, maybe at most. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Now, thinking about picture pages and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, was having the young you in the house making drawings, was that something that was encouraged, or was that something that was just like, well, that's what he does?
I don't recall. It definitely wasn't scolded. I think I got complimented for it to some extent. I feel like anything you really dive into, there's like early validation to it to help you like define yourself. I think that happened more in school, where like I was socially pretty awkward, and drawing, teachers would either put the drawings on the wall or kids would ask me for a specific drawing for them or something. But I think in elementary school, it felt like it had value socially.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I like about that is so many of the artists that we interview, or so many artists that I interview in this process, they'll talk about that sort of early validation. For some people, it's kind of a, I didn't really care what other people thought. It was a thing that I did. And other people, it's like, oh, well, I got this girl's attention, and that was validating, or this thing about the teacher's attention being validating. I mean, to me, that seems like it's a thing that all kids sort of crave and that we all sort of hunger for and we need. Now, where was this that you were going to school? It was there in Mississippi?
Yeah, I went to Escataba Elementary, and it would be so cool to say it was just my own thing, and I was always very, like, self-satiated and wanted to explore something deeper than acceptance. But no, it was very, like, it's fun to draw, and it was fun to daydream about it, but it was hugely important to me that other people thought well of me in any aspect. And I think to this day, it's, good or bad, it's a part of why I make art. It makes me feel like I belong socially.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, kind of like you were talking about being liked or being sort of for me, I can talk about being sort of a social, being on the outside of the cool kids, and how art was a thing that didn't necessarily got me noticed, but it got me safe. People wouldn't mess with me or bully with me as much because I had this like superpower, this ability to draw or whatever it was, that I was doing at the time. And now thinking about that school set up, was there support in there for the arts?
No. I didn't have art class until 11th grade. I went to a specific art magnet high school at that point. And I was lucky enough to be put into like a gifted program when I was in 6th grade. And that teacher was much more like, it was one day a week, but you almost had like a Montessori class where you got to sort of self-direct. And so like I had a 6 months where I just studied Egyptology and built a little fake temple, and 6 months where I tried building fake artifacts for a fake world and like created its own language and buried it and made other people dig it up and like decode it and try to figure out the culture. And that was really like important to kickstarting the creativity and knowing it can be deeper than like what I was given in class. And she's the lady who actually like told me about this school. It was the inaugural year it was going to open, and I applied, and it was way under funded and way under advertised. So I think only like 40 students applied, and we all got in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you were talking about being inspired by Egyptology. How was that even on your radar? I don't think that was even on my radar as a young maker.
That was like my first big obsession. I think we all hyperfixate on things. I grew up loving Ninja Turtles and like very normcore stuff from my age, but like WWF, Ninja Turtles, these were my hearts, and Batman. And elementary school, there was like a section of the library that was mythology, and I remember being like 5th grade and reading Edith Hamilton's mythology. It was like all Greek myths. And I got crazy into that, and then I got crazy into Egypt after, I think in 5th grade as well, we read like a young adult's book. What is it called? The Egypt Game, maybe?
Okay.
But it like glanced into the interest, and we had books on that, so I read all of those. And very lucky for that library. It had a lot of books that were like at the right reading level for me to get really into it. But I got into those two, and I got into Norse mythology. And a lot of my drawings, even at that age, were like, I got suspended in 5th grade for keeping a Trapper Keeper folder of Egyptian gods. I was trying to build like a encyclopedia of like their pantheon, and
like a pre-Google reference page, like
where
you could come in and have it at the ready.
So I draw their hieroglyph, and then I would like write fun facts. It was like baseball card almost, for, just like college ruled paper shit. And but it was Southern Mississippi, and someone found it and thought it was kind of occultish, and it was a slap on the wrist, but they took it away, and I couldn't draw in do that anymore.
Wow. Okay. Now, for me, those mythology and all the other things that we're sort of attracted to as kids, there's so many different reasons. I think they attract so many different kids for so many different reasons. And your reason might be radically different from some other kid's reason for being into the mythology or into the iconography or the hieroglyphs of the Egyptians. Was it just the connection between the possibility of image and storytelling? What was it about that hooked you think?
I think there's something validating in knowing something really existed. So like I think history is such a cool buttress to a thing. We're so inundated with sort of like fake stories. But it's wow to me, like these stories were so outlandish and the images were so unique and powerful. And to know it was like a real thing that happened and you can't touch it. It's the same like that same thin cloth that like makes it so close to seeing a dinosaur, but you can never see a dinosaur. Like it's that same sort of addiction feeling where you're so close to seeing ancient Egypt, but you can't see ancient Egypt. Was really appealing to me, and it lets you like daydream about it, but in this like hungrier way because it was real. Like you can go. I've many years later I got to see the pyramids, but it was like I cried. It was like that was such a weird obsession for me to like know it's real and like it happened and it's gone. And I've attached a lot of adult reasonings for it, but I think when I was young I like. It was like being told magic's real or something. It was so uncommon, and I went to church a lot at that age, and I was really interested in all the stories in the Bible, but it wasn't exciting. It was scary, and it was like a Baptist church, so we didn't have like colorful imagery, or it wasn't like a Catholic or Byzantine church where like it invited you in visually. It was much more like. They probably dressed just like us. Right. It's just they didn't have fantastic icons, but then you see like Horus with a hawk head, and you're like, this is sick.
I love that thing that you said about how it's like looking through a thin cloth or feeling through a thin cloth, like you're so close to it, but you're not quite there. Mm-hmm. I love that thing that you said, but then also the part where you have to do, you, the reader, the viewer, the kid, has to do some of that heavy lifting to bring these things to life. I love that passage. Was that something that you noticed happening in other areas of your life as well? Like in terms of, like obviously the Egyptology did this. Was that kind of storytelling or that kind of connection, was that something that was present in other aspects of your making life as a kid?
I think any world that is fully built, like I think Egypt and Greece especially have these extremely full worlds. Like there's what's the joke about the king of Troy's mother? What's her name? But she's such a minor character that's like academics make a joke about, like, well, it's not that complete. You can't find this person. Okay. There's like debate. There is a name, but that it's so fully realized, I think that makes that cloth feeling. But that happens to me with other things, especially growing up, like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, and like any sort of like world building space where like the creator has taken the time to give you all the facets to where you can daydream about it and build your own narratives. It's like a real magical place. Right. Mm-hmm.
And I also love how, like, as you were telling me that, my brain was like, well, that's kind of how WWE worked. You know, it was like this, we saw all the things and we knew that it was real, but there was that extra little thing that we had to do to be like, oh, no, it really is real. You know, it's like that kind of suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, okay, so thinking about that early stuff that you were talking about with being in the magnet high school or being in the arts, how did you describe it again?
It was called the Mississippi School of the Arts. It's still running now, doing great, but you apply sophomore year in high school, and excuse me, it had 4 majors when I was applying. It had writing, it had vocal music, theater, and visual arts. And I applied to be a writer. I wanted to be like a poet, philosopher, king. That was like my whole thing. Sounded cool. I kept this like notebook of hot takes, and like I would read my like Nietzsche book, and didn't really understand like any of the larger things, but he wrote in like aphorisms, so they were like, it was almost like reading like a calendar quote. You could like read a little paragraph of him and think about it a whole lot, and not do any of the work to understand the context of why it was great for a angsty teenage boy. And but that's what I wanted to be, is some sort of writer. And then when the school opened, they had to cut writing, but they had already let me in. So they were like, we're like, we don't have enough students. We've already told this boy he's moving. And so they asked me to pick another major, and they let me do that. And so
Wait, so you had to move to go to this high school?
yeah, it was there was a dormitory. It was like 3 hours away from my house.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was a huge upheaval. This wasn't just like here in Memphis where you would like go to Overton or something like this. This was a massive thing.
3-hour drive. It's like middle of the state. I'm from the Gulf Coast, bottom of the state.
Wow. Okay, so you ended up having to move and totally dislocate from the family as a 15, 16-year-old. And then, and so what was that like? I mean, that must have been both traumatic, but then also really exciting.
It was just exciting for me. I think the first couple weeks you're nervous. You don't know anybody, and you don't want to like become uncool again. Like you have a new shot. But I made friends a lot quicker, and I went from being like an extreme introvert at my former school and fairly unpopular and whatever, to being extremely loud and annoying and extroverted and tons of friends. And I mean, it was like Hogwarts. It was very like, I romantically think about that as like the best times of my life.
I love how you were talking about how it was like Hogwarts. Like for me, the high school experience the whole is kind of like how you were describing yours. But then there's that thing about being in the art room, and you recognize that you're around your people in the art room, and then there's a kind of safety in there, and then also a kind of confidence, because we're all nerds and we're all crazy about art, and we're crazy about making something and then maybe it not working, all of those things that we wouldn't normally do out in the world. And so it sounds like you went to this high school and it was like a huge art room where you were surrounded by these people who were like you.
It was it was very much like that. And then none of us had context of who each other was, so you got to sort of like build yourself again, where it's like, all right, these people have seen me embarrass myself since 5th grade and try different fashions and different personalities, and none of them take. And these,
Right.
like, you get a clean slate. So it was great. And then there were so many musicians and so many theater kids, and it was fun to like have that interdisciplinary thing, but it felt like we were all sort of cut from the same thing. And the people who kind of came, and not to be mean, because I'm sure they were wonderful people, but you're very judgy as a child, but they were like Abercrombie and Fitch, and they were like of nicer cloth than us. They had to sit outside in the cafeteria, like they were loners in this space, and eventually like went back to their old schools. And so it was like, there was just a lifting of self-consciousness to where like, I'm sure I was 10 times more embarrassing at this school, but I wasn't worried about embarrassing myself at that school.
Right. Now, what kind of things were you exposed to? What kind of things were you seeing, doing there?
I mean, I had never had an art class. When I changed majors, I had to give them a portfolio, and I had been to the like real portfolio day where I brought in writing, and people were bringing in like leather strap portfolios and sculptures and stuff. I had never seen those things. I handed them like an A4 cover bag that had 10 drawings on computer paper, and it was like Boba Fett and a Ninja Turtle, and they needed one ink drawing, and I like drew a skull from like a photo on Google or something. It was like it's a bad, laughable portfolio, but ultimately they were going to take me no matter what I sent, as long as I did the requirements at that point. But so like I remember the first day of art class, we did a still life, and we did acrylic paint. It was monochromatic, and we hung them on the wall. It was my first critique, and I hung mine at the very last, and we got to it, and she asked whose it was, and I refused to say anything. And she was like nice enough to pretend like the math isn't obvious, that it was mine. And she was like very polite about it and said some things, but I was so overwhelmed and like embarrassed. And yeah, that was great. But it was
now, how did you overcome that? I mean, just in terms of like, was it one of those things where you came in and you realized that you needed to catch up on a lot of things and you worked really hard? How did that work?
I was so much worse than most of the class. Like I just didn't have any experience. I'd never used a paintbrush, and so it didn't work like a pencil. And like I had never used a pencil that I didn't shade with my thumb, and like, and then you hear these things like when you're drawing next to people and they're like, you don't do that, and you're like, where'd you learn that? And it's like, fucking class, you idiot. Like, I was like, okay. But like that was the only way I knew, so every other way looked insane. And I think eventually I started doing like really abstract pieces, and they were like journal entries where I'd be like, yellow is anxiety and it's inside the red, which is anger. And then like it'd be this like, it was a therapy session in retrospect almost, but like I found that like the confidence I could get in the art, even though I lacked like skill, was like, I guess being like authentic to like my journal or something, like bringing, like I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to talk about things, and so bringing that in gave me something to like rest on. And in some ways I hid my skill, my lack of skill, by like extremely simplifying compositions for the time being. Like I couldn't do something complicated, so I paint organic shapes and then try to keep them clean, and or like coat them a lot, but I couldn't render, and I couldn't like be painterly at that point.
Now, so you were doing this class. You start off doing acrylic, still life. What other kind of curriculum or what other kind of coursework was involved here?
I mean, we had, it's so long ago, but we had like an art class, and she sort of just gave us like an overview of multiple media. So we did like an oil painting, we did a palette knife still life, we did charcoal drawings, we did blind contours. We had a ceramics class where we learned how to coil and throw and build a bust and glaze and fire. We had drawing classes. We had kind of like rudimentary printmaking. We didn't have like an etching space or a lithography space or anything like that, but we do like linoleum, like suicide blocks and stuff like that. But it was really just like sort of a boot camp of like, you're not going to get good at any of this, but you'll have touched all of it. And then senior year, they wanted us to build a body of work, and I started painting like really large because they had like infinite supply. They hadn't figured out they need to like have rules yet. We were the first year, so like we'd get like belts of canvas and these huge Winston Newton oil tubes, the size of your like forearm, and I'd just grab 16 of them and go out to the hallway and paint. And I was doing these like, it's so problematic now, but I was like super into, I was like, it was my first time learning about like Picasso. I'd never heard or seen his work, so I was like, all right, he's awesome, boom. I won't research further. And I was doing these things like based off of like masks from around the world, which I would like never in 100 years want to just go into so naively now, but like I would paint these big things, and it was like a series of people taking off masks, but they were all like 8 feet by 4 feet, and I was a lot of purple for some reason.
Especially that dioxazine purple.
It's so strong.
In the winter, it's just like, it's like, I don't know, like a Willy Wonka kind of thing. Like, do not put your tongue on this, but you can't help it.
I was like, I mean, the best way to describe it is I was like, I had never researched painting. I lived close enough to New Orleans. So I was like, these are the colors of painting. This is modern painting. They're hard to look at now. And I was really into Prussian blue. Prussian blue was like such a dark, rich color. And it would take over any other paint it was just like the Venom symbiote. It stained everything.
Now, you were saying Picasso, so you were also being exposed to art as well. Talk a little bit about some of the things you were seeing then.
All right. Well, it was a lot of the people that I feel most kids know if they had art class. So, I was seeing Dali for the first time, and Picasso and Van Gogh and all of those. But we did see contemporary artists, and I actually, I just spoke to Art 21 a couple of days ago, but it all kick-started by, I sent them a message and I was like, when I was 16, my teacher at this art high school would show us Art 21 documentaries, once a week or something until we saw the whole season. But there was a specific one there were two really. There was Barry McGee and Margaret Kilgallen's video, and that's what I was writing them about how much that I think inspired my career and how thankful I am for them. But she showed us that, and I thought these people are so much cooler than anyone I've ever seen. And they were the first contemporary artists I'd ever seen.
So in terms of the timeline or a stamp in terms of where we are in the history of the world, it's 2001-ish?
Probably 2003 maybe.
Okay. Now, I remember that first season coming out, and I remember the two of them were in there. And I remember, for me, that was also really transformative. I think I still have a real soft spot in my heart for Margaret Kilgallen especially. But talk a little bit about what was it about that segment that clicked for you?
I think it was my first exposure to, real... one, just contemporary people. They were all cool. I think they stuck out to me because Fred Burton once told me, whether I wanted to be or not, I'm a cartoonist. And I think at that time, I didn't think cartooning could be part of whatever I was learning. It felt cheap, or it was talked, I don't think purposefully, but teachers sort of talked disappointed. If you drew an anime character in high school, the teacher is disappointed. And so I think somewhere I internalized that's not the right direction. It's a fun direction, but it's like eating Doritos. It's not what you're supposed to eat for dinner. And so I think her showing us that was well, it might be okay. I think that gave me a little it let some pressure off that maybe if I end up not understanding how to do this without cartoons, I can go cartoony. But they were also so lovable. They seemed so authentic, and not to over sentimentalize them, but it was a time before social media, and he looked at his shoes the whole time, and he would say things that really resonate. I quote him in that documentary unconsciously all the time still, but he said something about I feel every time I do a museum show, I've got to paint 20 trains so 15-year-olds still think I'm cool. And I always liked that he seemed to feel the people to impress were the young generation and not the oldest generation. And that always made sense to me, especially at that age where I'm 16. I feel in charge of what's cool musically and what's cool culturally, and then I'm talking to a 50-year-old teacher who feels out of touch. So I liked that he was scared of the youth. He didn't want to not get their cosign because they're the leaders of culture, especially subcultures. But then there was also Trenton Doyle Hancock that season, And he was building a
And-
microverse and like,
And he's just got like a room full of toys.
Yeah.
And if there's anybody in there that feels like me, it's Trittendale Hancock. I mean, he's this sort of big, dopey, burly kind of guy, not cool at all, and totally from outer space. And then the work is just amazing.
yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I want to be as cool as Barry McGee, but I think there's like an unconscious part of me that feels a lot more like Trittendale Hancock, where like he does seem like he needs to prove craft skill, like, and like he makes these dimensional parts, and he's like, and that his narrative is, it's not just the surface of the image like Barry McGee. Barry McGee pushes a culture, but like Trittendale Hancock pushes an internal narrative, and I think they were both really influential. And I met Trittendale Hancock in New York years later, and I just could barely get my voice above whisper. I was so intimidated. We like ran into a gallery space, and they were like, "It's actually closed." I was like, "Can I please look at it?" And he was like, "Yeah." And like, it was just so uncomfortable for him, probably, but I was so thankful. And I've bought some of his vinyl toys since, and they're cool to have at the house. I have like Torpedo Boy and one of the Mounds. But yeah, that was all given to me because of the Mississippi School of Arts. I would have never seen those.
So you're looking at that stuff. Now, were other people in the class with you? Were they also, was it resonating with them as well?
I can't remember. I think we all thought it was cool. You know, we all wanted to be artists, but it's like someone who's never seen a pig saying they wanted to be a butcher. We have no idea what we were talking about. We're just learning how to like paint in this like middle of nowhere spot in Mississippi.
No, was it one of those things where there was a lot of community and a lot of connection between the people at the school, or was it competitive? How did it work?
I think there was both. I mean, my best friends were almost all theater majors, and I think I was always like impressed by the theater majors. I think, you know, I left school really wanting to be like sort of like thought of as smart. I think that was like my real like dream of how I wanted to be seen. And I tried to read these stuffy philosophy books, and I wrote a lot, and I made pretty good grades, and this was like my defense mostly to like, if people didn't want to talk with me, well, they're probably dumb, and I'm a super genius, and so that's why I'm lonely. And then when I got to like art high school, the visual art curriculum was the lightest load of the three. Like, it's self-directed. Visual arts is so self-directed, and especially in like the West, because I did live in Korea for a while, and they had an extraordinarily laborious curriculum. But we've made such a serious movement to not fetishize craft here, or think it's like necessary to be a creative, which has so many benefits, but it also means like the students are self-directed. Like, if you don't want to work, there is a argument to say you did work anyway. But vocal, they had to do these like strenuous lessons, and they had to memorize like music scales and all this, and then the theater majors had to read nonstop, and they looked sleep deprived, and they had to memorize books and then read them out loud. And so I think I was enamored by them, and so they kind of ended up being the people I hung around. But the art class, yeah, there was like one girl who was like head and shoulders better than all of us, and she had come from Jackson, which is like you know, the capital, and she was at an art high school already that was sort of made for that city. So she was incredible. Her mother was a painter or something, and so I think we were all just striving to try to like be in the conversation with her. And yeah, it was fun. It was a great time.
Now, you were saying that when you were a senior, you had to make a body of work that was sort of coherent. It was a body of work. So what did you end up doing?
It was that Masks series.
Okay. Now, were
And
they all that big scale that you were talking about before?
they were all pretty huge, yeah. And I had gotten into like, it's easy to romanticize how free you felt when you were young. I know if I look at the work, it's genuinely atrocious. But like, I'd read something about Norse tapestries, and then I'd get some twine, and I'd like start sewing into the canvas, and I'd paint on that, and it was extremely messy, but incredibly free. Like, the teachers were like glad I was self motivated. I think I've always been like good at putting the hours in more than like maybe the students around me sometimes, but like it wasn't good, but you could tell I was like entertained with what I was doing, I guess. And so yeah, the work, I mean, I think what tied it all together was a very poor investment in purple and Prussian blue, and like making an extremely murky image and then doing extremely thick white lines to like beg it back to a composition.
With that beautiful titanium white.
Titanium white that
I'm telling
holds
you,
up so well.
I have used so many different whites. Like I remember buying this Kremnitz white. I had to like sneak it in from England because it had lead, and it's like the one that Lucian Freud uses, and it was like it's supposed to be the best. But I was just like, it's not nearly as good as that Winton, that horrible like 99% wax or whatever the hell is in that thing. But man, the physicality of that Winton paint, I'm telling you, it's gotta be responsible for so many people being painters.
Those paintings would take weeks to dry. It was so thick, and I wouldn't clean my brushes, so everything sort of had the color ambiance of dirty paint thinner. And then to like resist the graying out, I would just lather on more paint. It was all the wrong ways to paint with an incredible amount of confidence. I feel like the more you learn, the less confident you get sometimes. It's such a tragic inverse of how it should be, because if I could paint as free as I painted when I was 16, I'd be so much better today. But instead, I'm extremely tedious to the point of ruining my own paint strokes, because I'm like overthinking the painting algorithm of what needs to come next and before,
but also there's just like you were saying there, the size of like a baby's arm. There's something about a big tube of paint that costs like $3 or whatever it was, and you don't have to think about how much it costs every time you squeeze it really hard.
I'm sure they cost $20.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, when I saw Jim Carrey's documentary of him painting, and he had just all those giant tubes, the same tubes I used at like 16, I was like, yeah, it doesn't hurt you if you do 40 paintings today. Like, if 2 of them come out cool, that's wonderful.
Now, so you finished there at the high school, and then you decide, is that when you decided to apply to MCA?
Well, you apply, your senior year, so I'm still going to school, and I tell my parents what schools I'm interested in, and my dad is like, you have such an incorrect perception of like what are your options. And so I was like very bereft. I was like, I can't go to Pepperdine. I was like, what? And like, not only that, but I can't apply to places that are like $100 application fees. So it got very limited. I applied to MCA because MCA scouted our school. It's the only reason I had ever heard of it. And then I took interviews at Ole Miss and University of Southern Mississippi. And University of Southern Mississippi offered me a full ride, but I was like, I don't know, an annoying teenage child who thought too highly of himself and had been like given too many pats on the back, so I did not want to be in state. I felt like you cannot be successful if you can't even get out of your state. Like, it was like I was going to fail. And then MCA offered me some specific scholarship that paid for the first 2 years with like a chance for an extension or something. And so yeah, we came to visit the school, and it was like I had never been to a big city outside of New Orleans, so it felt like a big city. And the school, Calicut is very like striking. You don't see things like that in Mississippi, and it's in a beautiful park. And I was just like, this feels like art school. Like I didn't. It wasn't a deep decision. I don't think I even toured the facilities. I was just like, this is art college. I'll go here, and yeah, went to MCA.
Okay, so you decided to go there, and then you were saying that you were in Memphis. Now, I think this was when I was sort of paying attention, and I was also a part of the community in terms of being here then. So this is like 2004, 2005.
Yeah, 2005 to 2009 I went.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about the first semester at MCA, because I know you were also there with a lot of people who were awesome. And I know that you were also there at a time when the school was kind of thriving.
Yeah, it was going. I mean, I had nothing to compare it to, right? But it seemed exciting. I remember being very intimidated of the elder classmen and their work. And it was, I'm sure, what most people feel when they leave a high school. It's like, I'm a tiny fish. I thought I was, like, pretty good. I'm not. And I think I was thrown into drawing with Maritza Davila, and had a full breakdown when she asked me to do like, is it 2-point perspective, like of an interior? And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I do these things to avoid this. Like I never learned this, and I don't want to do this.
Right.
Like I think at that age, I kind of understood a style is. Paul Heyman from wrestling used to say, you accentuate your strengths and you hide your weaknesses. And I always think about that when I was young of like, I drew like this because I cannot draw all these other ways. And so like, I want to do this. And she was like, oh, that's stupid. This is drawing class. And I was like, but what if it's bad? And she was like, this is not your show. Like this is school. But I remember like freaking out, wanting to leave school that night, and like calling the theater teacher from the art high school. And he got on the phone with me and explained how to draw a box with 4 lines coming out. And then like I didn't even call the art teacher, I was too embarrassed, but the theater teacher was much more like conversational, and he calmed me down through that panic attack. And yeah, it was exciting. It felt real. The ideas were real. The way people talked about their future seemed consequential. I think when I look back, I can have like different images of it, but like when I was there, it felt like I was suddenly very close to, the Guggenheim, and very close to contemporary art, and very close to like, it felt like I was part of this like group that was exploring the boundary of a thing. Like it felt contemporary, and I really wanted to excel at that. I think it also awakened in me that previous maybe like need to seem intelligent. Like, so that was already in me from like being sort of a loner in school and defining myself as like, I'll be smart, and so that makes, if they don't like me, they're dumb. I think art school sort of like, it gave you awards for validating that instinct. So like, I wanted to read all the books, and like, my work was never the strongest in class, but I could be the most like articulate, and I could be the most like devastating during a critique. And I think I, at an early age, enjoyed the punitive nature of like being able to out-argue someone about a superfluous drawing. Like, it was a horrible personality trait.
It's so interesting, Michael. I love how you're doing this really great. You're doing a really great job of talking about the things that you did, both acknowledging the fact that it was part of you then, but then also recognizing that, oh Lord, now I would never do that. Like that thing that you were talking about, Picasso. I mean, to me, that's such a great way of sort of owning where we were, and then also recognizing how we were young, and then also recognizing how, as we sit here in the room today, we are older, and we're sort of aware of that. I love how you, I love how you keep doing that. But I mean, one thing I'm super curious about is those early experiences. I mean, as someone who experienced MCA from an outsider's point of view, I taught there briefly just for a couple of classes, and so I remember having Alex Harrison in one of my classes, and I remember Alex was kind of like this kid, if I remember right, from a tiny town in Mississippi. He and his sister both, and I remember their minds were just totally blown by MCA. And I remember looking through Alex's sketchbook and how you could tell that Alex was always a very gifted drawer. But then you could also see, like, as you flip through the sketchbook, you could see where Alex was being exposed to more and more things, and how he was sort of wrestling with that and sort of thinking about a lot of that stuff in the sketchbook. I mean, I use his sketchbook as an example for my students now. But I'm curious, like, when you got to MCA, I mean, I love this way that you're sort of talking about yourself in the past tense, but what were some things that you were struggling with, or you were sort of thinking about as you entered the school?
Alex Harrison was a huge light and influence. I mean, I think his sketchbooks were like enough to make me want to give up drawing almost. Like they were
Me too.
They were incredible. His narratives were incredible. Like he felt like he had everything. Like he was a total package as an artist. And like at that age and in Memphis at that time, he was like the only person I knew, even peripherally, that was doing jobs and was like earning money. And like he had, I think, illustrations in the flyer, and he did the side of the high tone. And so he was like, yeah, shout out to him. And Judith was like incredible. I was obsessed with William Bevan's work when I was around that age. Like he was in the Warble as well, and his work was a lot more like sympathetic towards like outsider art, and like it was like wild biomorphic abstractions, but it didn't seem like he could draw a line that wasn't attractive on a page. But I remember going into class, and we had like, I forget, it wasn't Insane Clown Posse, it was Ideas Process Criticism. And it was like they'd give us a random book, or we had to go buy a random book, and it would become a sketchbook, and it was supposed to be a class where you learn concepts. And I remember really struggling and being very like argumentative with the teachers, where like I didn't like the prompts, and I wanted to build my own narratives, and I thought I knew a lot, and I really struggled in that class because of that. And I forget, it was Susan Makestad and Leandra and Howard Payne. And Howard Payne was incredibly patient with me. Like in Russia, like what an annoying thing to show up in your office. It's like me indignant about a grade or something. I think I had a lot of insecurity from like knowing I didn't know much and not wanting to show it, because you're like presenting every week, so it feels like I had this instinct that it would be benched or something somehow. I wanted to like stay competitive, but I did not know anything and I didn't have any skill. And so it was hard for me to accept my new role like that first year, I think.
Now, were you still thinking of yourself as someone with little skill after the 2 years at the high school?
I think my mind was I wanted to believe I was this confident artist who had found my voice at the ripe elderly age of 18. And then I was being presented with like classes that didn't let me escape into this like sort of type of painting, the specific thing that I felt confidence with. But I wasn't dynamic as an artist. I couldn't do anything else than that, which is probably a problem. And so I struggled a bit with that. And I remember once I started taking art history classes, I think we had to take like sort of general ones first. Maybe they didn't have the biggest impact. I like them, but I think once I started being able to take like contemporary modern art history classes, I felt very different because I felt like I now had the Bible I could go to like draw my references, and I could like I had scaffolding for my arguments that worked in this world. Like my personal arguments didn't make sense here, but I could talk about Rauschenberg now. I could talk about like Neo-Dada, and I could whatever I needed to do. I knew the landscape suddenly, and so I think Adrian Duran was like a real godsend for me. I was sort of like in an existential crisis and like an ego death from like what I thought I had already achieved to realizing that was like a fever dream, and I like had achieved nothing but like being supported by very loving art teachers in high school. That it's like I thought I had done a lot more. And so college was great because I think you need to be humbled multiple times in your life, and I made good friends there, and people who were a lot better than me at everything, from being like a human, from being a critical mind, to being an excellent like skill and draftsman. Like I hung around a guy named Derek Dent all the time, and I think it was good just to see how much time he put in daily at drawing, and how much like how he never rested on what he drew before. So I think he was great. I started taking a drawing class with Fred Burden, and I think Fred Burden sort of he gave me I already had this personal narrative thing I wanted to do, and I think Fred was a really great professor at harnessing that and allowing you to go on your own like internal thing, but while giving you structure to it. And so I really lived for the little one-on-ones where you'd go through your whole sketchbook and then talk to you directly about it. And it was like going to church. It was like very intense. You looked forward to this and kind of was like afraid of it all week.
Well, I mean, same here, just in terms of thinking about like when I was teaching there, people really had this kind of, it was kind of this cult of Fred Burton. And I remember Fred had this really great thing that he did where he was kind of around the time that you're talking about, sort of in the early days of the internet, where we didn't have the internet in our pockets. And he would have people do research and find paintings or work and then print it off and then bring it in. And there was this and I remember looking through somebody's, I can't remember whose it was, but I remember looking through somebody's book, and I remember noticing how by doing it that way, you totally remove any kind of status or cachet that you would get in a magazine. Like, did this come out of Art Forum? Did it come out of Southwest Art? Did it come out of the Memphis Flyer? What did it come out of? And so there was no hierarchy there that was removed. And then also which gallery is it in? Is it at Pace? Is it David Zwirner or Gagosian? And so all that was gone too. And so you were just left with the work. And there was this thing that you had to do where you had to think and you had to really look at it and you had to figure out whether or not it was good. And I remember that for me was a really powerful thing. And just as an outside observer, I don't think I ever interacted with Fred really, but I know that was a thing that he did. And I also know that thing that you're talking about with that one-on-one time is something that other people have mentioned. And just out of curiosity, since we're talking about MCA, what were some other things that you remember strikingly about Fred's class?
A bell to that, I follow Fred on Facebook still.
Okay.
But Fred still, he just posts artists with no context. And sometimes they're like friends of mine. And then it'll be after that will be Philip Guston. But he really doesn't put weight if it's interesting and if there's something to be gotten from it. I think he felt like he really invested in you, like he had like an emotional interest in you. I remember it meaning a whole lot to me because I don't know how many students he had, but it was more than one, and it would be a weekly thing at some points where like I would go to my MCA mailbox and there'd be a stapled packet of references and things where like we hadn't had a class together or that day, or maybe even I didn't have a class with him that semester, and he would have seen my work being displayed on the printmaking gallery wall or something, and he'll have thought of me enough to go Xerox these things from the library, staple them together, write a little note. But I think I know he was like a divisive. Some people did not like it, and I know some of his like colleagues felt like he didn't fit the spirit overall of MCA. Like there was like this. It felt like most of the school kind of thought of art one way, and Fred was a little bit of an outlier to how you think of it. It was much more like personal, but he buys into you, and you feel so specific, like you're not in the class. You're just like he makes you feel special, and then you really want his validation. Like you really like work for him because of that. So like he got me to read Night Studio, and like Philip Guston's probably like the most influential painter from the main canon that like I would cite as being like really important for me. And but he was a great teacher. And when I painted my first mural here in Memphis, he came out, and like it's not like we stay in touch often, but like he came out and he sat there and told me 10 painters to look up and a residency to look up, and like he was very like, I think he was a grounding force because I could relate to how he thought about art, while the way everyone else talked about art was cool and super interesting and I wanted to know it, but it was so different than like I think your intuition about why you do art when you're like a 14-year-old who just wants to like be seen and draw and like have people notice them and accept them and stuff.
And then just because you mentioned Guston, I'm contractually obligated to mention Guston in every one of these interviews. So what, I mean, I know that I love Guston, and I know that you love Guston, but what's your, in the same way that we were talking about the mythology, what was it about Guston that draws you?
I don't know. I think you know, it's, I think I grew up Protestant, so and I grew up not being able to draw and deeply insecure about that. So I love that his early works and his social works are incredibly competent rendering skill. I think no matter how much I tell myself and I rationalize that is not important, it's important to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't want it to be, and I don't want to project that on other people. And I don't, when I see other people's art, it's not like if I see a painting that's not rendered, I'm like, but like internally, I'm forever insecure about my drawing. And so like, I think when I see someone can render, it unconsciously over-validates them. So I like that he had that beginning. I like that he was like an Abex painter and he had gotten that success. And then like, obviously I like that he left that security and he came back to narrative. And same thing with like, I don't know, Barry McGee or something, that he's doing something that is relatable to like my initial instincts of how I want to do art, and it's being accepted eventually, and that he's important and that it shows like this can work. And I loved his colors, I loved his compositions, I loved that he had like a lexicon of reoccurring images, and I think that gets such a bad rap sometimes. It can become so one-sided that you're just a brand, and then if your artist statement isn't about being a brand, that can feel weak. Some people do it really well, like Shepard Fairey or Cause, but he was able to like do that, but then pull it back enough to where it wasn't just branding. It was like there was narrative and there was depth, and it seemed like a man reflective of all his fears in life and his stories. And you could buy into the biography behind him.
And the thick, juicy paint. I mean, the ridiculous viscosity.
He was
of
an
that
incredible
paint.
painter.
Yeah. Okay, so now back to thinking about some of the teachers there at MCA, or even some of the people. I mean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Derek. I mean, I remember Derek as being a part, if I'm not mistaken, of the Roselle Artist Guild.
He was, yeah.
And talk a little bit more about some of the people that you had classes with. I know you mentioned Derek, and I love his drawings.
Derek was older than me, not by much, but we didn't have any classes together.
Okay.
But we lived together, and I was part of the Roselle Artist Guild, and we did a lot of projects together, and we did a lot of collaborative paintings together, and we got really into collaborative, like, live painting and throwing graves to to finance art shows. And my first artist in residency was a room I built with Shay Colburn in an abandoned warehouse, and we sent like a fake email to me from the Roselle email address with congratulations, and like I think it's probably still on my CV, but it's, you know.
Now, how did you guys all get together? Because if I remember right, it was you and Derek and Shay and Lauren Ray, and
the initial idea, the seed was sort of like Bill Bevan, me, Shay, and Lauren Ray. I think Shay and Lauren Ray were dating at the time, and they probably were the two putting the most glue into building it. I think me and Bill were into it, but I feel like it was probably Shay the most. Shay was sort of the de facto leader. But we were just drinking, and we went to this spot that Bill knew where you could paint trains, and then you'd hang out in this little spot, and you could build a fire, and it was away from the driving man who goes down the train track and stuff. And we just talked about how we want to build an art thing, and we could use this warehouse, and we're going to change the world. All the ideas were grandiose, like stroke delusional, but like we were like young and excited. And I think Memphis is a great place to have like really big ideas. It gets tough when you need funding, but like I do feel like Memphis can be like a sandbox sort of, where it's like there's not 2,800 other anarchist co-ops trying to happen right now. Like you can be the one, and it's easy enough to get on the news, and it's easy enough to throw a party. And so yeah, it just kind of started through that. And then me and Bill at that time were drawing like obsessively. We do like 3-4 by 3 foot pastel with ink and painting like collabs a day. And it was all from this milk crate paper that Fred Burden would give us in giant belts.
I really think there should be somehow we should be able to go back in time and get all of the art that was made from those milk carton papers, because Pinckney Herbert also had one at Martial Arts, and it was just like a license to work big. It's like you were talking about that the Winton paint, but I mean, and I feel like some other people had it. I think there was a roll at Plan B as well,
okay.
Like even before Roselle. But okay, so sorry, I didn't mean to derail us, but now just to backtrack a second. You were talking about doing the collaborations with Bill. Were those the first collaborations that you had done?
I don't know. Those are the major ones.
Okay.
That's the first sort of like.
So now what drew you to it? Some people, collaborating is not in their DNA. It's just not a part of their temperament. But what was it about working with Bill that worked well with you?
Well, it was fun. I felt like I was learning. I really like respected Bill as an artist, and I think to this day, in general, I like to do collabs where I feel like I'm in a state where I have to keep up, and I think that's the best way to grow. And so like selfishly, like I want to be slightly over my head with the people I'm around, and Bill gave me that, and then painting with Derek gave me that. And Shay was an incredible renderer. He could do these, like, he could make up folds of cloth that were really believable, and it was important to be around them and not ask them how to do it, but you just see, like, he draws the line, he draws the highlight, he drops the shadow, blah, blah, blah. And so I feel like MCA was so great at kind of deconstructing me and making me a critical thinker and knowledgeable about this world that I'm about to participate in. But it wasn't a craft school. It like drawing class did not really teach me how to draw, and printmaking class, we didn't focus on the craft really. Painting, we never learned anything about painting. Like painting less so than any of the other ones. It was you were left to figure out paint. And so I think it was important to learn from my peers, and they had better skills, and they had their own unique skills, and they were, super important to like making me feel a little more confident about knowing how to execute something, because I didn't know how to do anything.
No, you were talking about, I love all that stuff that you were talking about with collaboration. For me, same. When I work with Tad, I know that it's like playing chess, kind of. But I know that Tad brings his A game, and I know that Tad is a really fantastic painter, and he's going to make me do things that I would never do. And so I love that part of it. And then I love that thing, too, that you said about it sort of rhymes with that adage, like if you want to learn, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. Know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I love that thing that you said. Now, thinking about, again, Rozelle, so you were saying that you guys were kind of hanging out in this space, and that you were saying, this is what we want. And then how do you go from saying it would be cool if we did this to having a space?
I think so much of that was Shay is extremely extroverted and good at talking to people, extremely personable. Lauren Ray is extremely logical and can follow steps and is good at getting things done. I think they were super important to that. I think when it comes down to it, a lot of the team, we're good at moving boxes and painting and being a general atmosphere, but so much of that was Shay, and so much of that was Lauren, where like I don't think I was mature enough yet to have like convinced the owner of a building that I could squat in it unofficially, or so I think a lot of it was that we got a lot of people. Memphis in general was so like quick to adopt an idea. Like, we're happy to do it. We might not have the money for it, but we weren't there long, and Live from Memphis was making a short video for us, and so it just kind of rolled really quickly. Tad was really supportive of it, but yeah, I think a lot of that was outside of me. I drew a lot, and I painted a lot, and I did some of the writing for it, but I think that's all. Lauren and Shay have a lot of strengths that can do that.
Also for me, thinking about that, I love how you said, Memphis is a city without 28,000 other people who are trying to do this thing, but also I like how you were talking about how it's possible, how Memphis is a place where you would be able to do that. But then also, I think part of it maybe comes from people in Memphis will often recognize like a lack, a hole in the ecosystem, and to say, oh, there's not a space for this. I can make a space for this. I can make that happen. And so I love how you were talking about that too. Now, back to Rozelle Artist Guild and thinking about that space, one of the things I think that it was also really great was that it made people really excited. And I think there are spaces that, like, martial arts has a function, material had a function, Rozelle Artist Guild had a very different kind of function. How did you see it working inside the community?
I don't think in a way that probably makes any sense. I thought we really thought we were going to transform a lot by making a thing to where artists had a landing pad after school. So we wanted to be a transitional space for, like, you graduated, you've learned a whole lot about something that doesn't really exist here. Like you know how to shop yourself to galleries that functionally aren't here, and there's not a ton of spaces for you, and there's not a ton of places to show for you, and especially if you're doing work that isn't polished and super cohesive. If you're messy and experimental, and like there wasn't that space yet, and so we thought we'd sort of be that, and we wanted to be that, but also a space that could be painting studios. And Ashley Leem worked in there nonstop on her paintings, and we thought it could be that. It could be a venue that could have performance art and like costumed art and DJ shows, and we wanted this like really open-ended sort of utopian space to where like I think we were all having the dread of graduation coming, and this gave us a place to like push the dread back, where it's like, well, we'll extend school. We'll continue these ideas, and maybe we can find funding for it, and then we don't have to like give up all this motivation. I can keep reading art theory books and like just keep sharpening, because it feels like you get to a point where you're starting to figure it out, some grand idea, and then 2 weeks later you graduate.
Right.
Like it feels like such a
it's like a blip.
Yeah, it's like watching a load file get to 97% and then your computer dies or something. It's just and yeah, a lot of us didn't feel like it was super smart to go directly into masters, and probably didn't feel confident we could even get into one. But we were all in extreme debt at that point by the end of our college stay, so like we were trying to find a DIY master's program.
But also, I think it is a way to maintain community. I think so much of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of MCA was about being around these people and about that energy. And like you were saying, Derek could do this and Shay could do this and Lauren Ray was good at that. And I think there's a part of us that's logical that doesn't want that to end. Like if there's some way to continue it. For me, that was I found that in martial arts when I graduated. I ended up being a part of that sort of hardwired community of misfit artists, who were down there. But again, that's a totally different kind of atmosphere and a totally different kind of feel. And I could see where Rozelle worked in a totally different way for you guys.
Yeah, I think it was trying to keep community. Not to jump ahead, but I that's very much what I think pulled me into street art ultimately, is like there was this interim period between Rozelle kind of closing, shuttering, and that where I was trying to be a gallery artist, and it felt extremely lonely and competitive and difficult. And when I got into street art, it was this very like, oh, I'm going to paint next to 6 other people all day, and there wasn't money in it at that point, so everyone was like, there was no competition to wasting your money on a wall on the weekend. So I think ultimately you just keep coming back to community.
Now, how did you make that jump? When was this that you started working outside, working on walls?
I did my first mural when I was 19 on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It was right after Hurricane Katrina, and it was like a memorial wall for the hurricane. It was paintbrushes, and it was very much in this like Picasso indebted high school style, but I had a lot of fun with it, and I remember enjoying it a lot, but it was completely unrelated to like street art culture or anything like that. Throughout college, I would paint trains and abandoned buildings with Bill and Shay sometimes, but again, it was really like naive. I would do like I remember writing an entire quote from Ishmael by Daniel Quinn on a train. Like it was very like dumb college kid graffiti. I would paint Kermit the Frog on trains, or like it. I didn't understand the larger things, and I kept like sort of like overlapping with the people who were much more into the culture, like Nosy and like I didn't really know them in college, but I would see them sometimes. They would hang out in the Rozelle courtyard because it was the same train yard that UH and 42 would paint. But I graduated, and Razel lasted for a little bit after that, not the longest time. And then I worked as a ditch digger for a plumbing company on the Gulf Coast, and it was terrible. And I worked with these people, and they just seemed like they were so unhappy, and they were older than me, and I was just like really scared this was going to be my fate. And they were like, not to say anything bad about it, but they were like creationists. They didn't believe in dinosaurs, and like I was like, all right, this isn't my community. And Ashley Gerst, who was a painter from MCA, she had went to South Korea to teach English for a year. And I tried applying to Japan, and I wanted to go to Shanghai and teach. That's what I thought I was going to do. I was really into Ai Weiwei at the time. He was like, and I was like, I'm going to go, and I'm going to get to see a studio and all this stuff. And the paperwork seemed kind of like, the reviews were kind of mixed with working in China. The Japanese reviews were like, I basically, it was too competitive for like the education I had. And then Korea was, I felt like I could get in. So I was like, I know the least about Korea. I'll go to Korea. And they did like an interview with me, and they're like, what do you know about Korea? And I was like, oh, like turtle ships, like Isun Shin. I only knew it from a video game I played when I was like a kid. But that was enough, and they brought me over there. I ended up being there for 4 years. The first year I taught English. The second year I taught at a university, and I taught American music history and life drawing. And then the last 2 years...
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were there for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then was life drawing? I mean, you were talking earlier about the things that you knew how to do and the things that you were comfortable doing. Is that one of the things that you were comfortable doing, or did you just kind of end up there?
I mean, college was 4 years. I got a little bit better at everything. So hopefully I can do it all right now. I remember liking life drawing. I wouldn't say I was like the best person to learn from, but the school was like a hospitality university, and so a lot of their things was like they wanted classes where the students were exposed to like the curriculum but in English. And so it's like this sort of like polishing of your English understanding thing. Okay. So you could take art classes, be an art credit, but you're mainly getting an English education. And so we did that, and yeah, it's not like I knew a lot about American music history, really.
Right.
But I got to write my own curriculum, so I did like Afro-spiritual to Public Enemy or something, and it was fun.
Now, was teaching a kind of a natural thing for you?
No. I didn't enjoy it. I feel too petty. I'm not. I can't take students like really stressing on me, or like if they don't understand why I did something the way I did, or if they think I'm teaching poorly, I crumble. I'm like, you're right. I should leave. But university was better than my first year, which I taught middle school, and that was extremely hard because they were just quiet and uninterested, and it was my first year teaching ever, so I had the least confidence in myself and my speaking. And they do like a 1 week boot camp to show you how to teach English, and then you're thrown in a public school. So it was a mess. I think my last 2 years I would work at elementary schools, and I would teach like reading and history, and I taught, I think, 4th grade, and I don't think I was an amazing teacher, but I had an amazing time. I liked working with younger students, and I think it's easier to keep their attention and kind of be a clown, and like if it was like silly, I felt a lot more comfortable. But during that time, I started working as an illustrator, and I worked for 2 magazines and a newspaper doing illustrations. They have like English versions of all this media. So they give me like they give me a topic or an article at like 6 p.m. and then I'd have to send them something by 2 a.m. So I'd have this little window, and I'd have to send it a few times to get feedback from the concept. And I'd never really been an illustrator since like, elementary school. But I loved it because there was something like freeing about it, where I was like, it was outside of me and people were getting to see my work instead of like I was making all this conceptual work in Korea still. But it felt like I was like, I told Chad this, it felt like I was playing Pokemon all college. Like, it's fun to play Pokemon and you're with all your friends who know everything about Pokemon, and so you can do little like inside Pokemon jokes and it all makes sense because you all know so much about it. But it's not fun playing it by yourself. It's a social activity. I think contemporary art like conversations are a social activity. Like it's fun to intellectually joust and to like, it's fun to talk about Maurizio Catalan, but if no one else knows about him or his context, it doesn't seem as cool to them. And like, they're not wrong to not be interested in a banana if you don't know about the Picasso mache head and you don't know about charged air and like Manzoni, and if you don't know about Italian contemporary comedy, it don't hit really. And so it felt like I was doing that. Like I was doing inside jokes by myself. And so I think the illustration jobs gave me something that people understood, and it also allowed me to start making work that felt like the original reason I liked making art. Like I fell in love with like talking in the painting timeline, and I wanted to like have a conversation with all these dead painters, and I wanted to be like part of this like beautiful, cool thing that is ultimately like nerdy and just really fun. But I wasn't in school anymore, and I wasn't in a place where this was the conversation anymore. And I needed, if I wanted to keep making art, I needed to make something that made sense if I was talking to myself, by myself. So I think in Korea, I was so removed from everything that it allowed me to like kind of go back to like drawing castles and Ninja Turtles and things that like made sense to me, and go back to my work in high school where it felt like it was a personal narrative, but it felt better because like, I think college like broke bad habits and broke bones and remended them correctly. Like I don't think the work I made in high school would have ever been good if I stuck with it. I think I needed to learn a whole lot before I tried like going into this like tractor beam of like personal stuff. I do think like it's unfortunate these days when like students, not even students, artists are like so caught up in the way the world works and the internet works that they feel like they need to brand themselves and stylize themselves so early, because it's really hard to break those bones, and there's probably a secondary or a late style that's going to be a lot better for your voice and like a lot more transcendent to the audience if you can just like put it off. But there's so much pressure to like, you need to figure out what gets you an audience right now. Because like I think we were like almost the last generation to have like an anonymity with our work for a while. Like there was no pressure for me to post it. There wasn't really places online to post it. You know, you could have a show or not a show, but yeah, the illustration job was great. And then I started noticing in my illustrations that there were shortcuts I was doing each time. And once I noticed that, I would like start doing it purposefully in my private work. I was like, oh, I always draw a hand like this. When I have a time limit, I'll draw it like this on this drawing. And then I'll draw these abstractions, but in the same sort of style. And then that started sort of building the beginning of what my work looks like now. And around that time, I started really running into a lot of incredible graffiti in Seoul. I'd moved to Seoul the last 2 years, and managed to meet a lot of the people I saw on the streets because social media existed by then. So I'd text them really formal Korean, and they'd send me back like an English response. I was like, "Let's get dumplings" or something, and they were incredibly kind and open. I'd been applying to galleries, and it wasn't like bad. It just wasn't anywhere as warm as like these people who were painted on streets wanted to get soup like that night. And like, I think things outside of what you actually make actually decide where you want to spend your time. Like, so the street art community there was so sweet and warm to me, and they invited me to all these shows, and I started doing live paintings at events, and some of it was like, I'm sure it was novel to have like an American in the show. But for whatever reason, they were really like supportive and kind, and kind of like sold me on like, I like everything I learned in school. I like that type of artwork. I don't know if I'm built for that type of life. Like, I'm not rigorous enough maybe for it. I don't feel like I'm in the right city ultimately to make work that is only about what I was trying to make my art about. And
Well, you know, I think for me, one of the things I really am struck by is how. So when I was in school, we had this particular path, you know, and they laid it out for everybody exactly the same. You know, it was like you get your BFA, and then you do some stuff, something, then you get your MFA, and then you do something, and then, you know, you have a gallery show, and then you're on art forum, and this is how it works, you know. And I think we're sold that, and I don't think at any point anyone said anything about family. Nobody said anything at all about relationships or health insurance or any of these things. And you know, when I hear you talking about that, like, part of me thinks, oh man, you know, that hierarchy of what we were sold in school is still present. You know, I mean, when I think of you as somebody who, you know, makes these amazing pieces, and they're massive, and everyone sees them, and people interact with them that would never see my paintings, and how people know you in ways that they would never know somebody that you might think of as a more successful gallery artist, you know. And then this thing that you were talking about, how you were trying to get into or talk to galleries, and how it was like cold shoulder, but then all of a sudden you found this community where they wanted to go get soup. I mean, to me, all of that feels like you're making a world where you're able to do the things that feed you, no pun intended with the soup and the dumplings, but like, you're able to do all those things. And that's the thing that I'm trying to talk to my students about a lot, is this like, what is it that makes you happy? What is it that you need? You know, do you need a parade, and do you need to be on the cover of Art Forum? If you do, then you need to do these things. Or if you want to travel the globe and make huge, amazing murals and be known for this, and to be this kind of like art nomad, and to just go from place to place and meet with people and learn and talk to people, and again, be surrounded by other people who are amazing, then that's what you do. I mean, for me, thinking about you as a person in the world, it's such a great example. And of course, all I know is, you know, social media stuff, but then also our brief conversations at openings. I mean, to me, when I see what you've got going on, it feels really like you've built this world where you're able to do the things that are really important to you, you know. And to me, it's super admirable. I probably should have said this at the very beginning. I mean, I think one of the things I love about these conversations is that I get to talk to people that I admire and that I really enjoy being around. And then being able to hear their stories. I mean, for you, when you were doing that stuff in Korea, is this something that you were kind of thinking about in terms of the sense of community and the sense of, for you, what is it that makes Michael feel successful or feel happy in the world?
I don't know how conscious it was. I think it felt immediate once it kind of happened. I always thought graffiti was really incredible. I always thought street art was really incredible. I did the pop-up painting for the Beautiful Losers documentary for the Brooks Museum while I was still in college, so I had never like lost that. But I don't want to put this all on college, but for whatever reason I had internalized that it was not viable as a route that would get me respect. It felt like I had multiple wants and desires, but like I wanted to be respected by this art world that I was like completely inundated in, and I wanted to be seen, like I've always wanted to be seen as like intelligent, and I think I equated that with like validation from my professors and from my things, and I think I projected on them. Like in retrospect, like Tad would not mind at all if I had gone the route I went. Like he's been one of the most like supportive, like nicest humans ever. But I always wanted to be extra clever around him. Like I looked up to him so much, and like, you know, death of painting is like such a cool concept for like a young person, and it just didn't feel like I could make the work that I ultimately made in that environment. And I think when I left school and I was working at that ditch digging thing, I do a single watercolor every night because of that John Paul Sartre quote about like you are your habits. So like I had to paint every day or I wasn't a painter anymore. And I was like, my ego was too large to let it die. I thought if I ever don't paint for a day, I'll never paint again. Like you can never get the fire back. I was so scared of that. And so I think by the time I got to Korea, the candle had gotten so low that I was just a sketchbook artist at this point. I worked on it every day, but I think I had like given up on being a professional artist, and I think once I realized I couldn't have that, it allowed me to just look for anything that made it fun to where it wasn't like going to the gym daily. Like I needed, like it felt like I was doing like, I was just being obstinate to like draw anymore. Like I was like drawing these things and reading like bits of like contemporary art criticism and being like, here's a little thumbnail of what I would do if I had a studio and I was really painting and I had more than 2 hours today to work. And I think street art hit me so instantaneously, and there was no pressure because it couldn't be a career and it wasn't real. It was just this like thing outside of this tension I had built up with the art world and not being enough for it and not being successful, that like it'll allow me to paint, and then I can still be a painter, and then no one can say I'm not a painter, and that'll be my one thing I still have left to this like
a secret.
This one thing I have left to this fantastic debt I have. It's like, you have a fantastic debt. Yes, I'm still a painter though. I don't just have this debt and I'm not a painter. So it's just like hard-headedness, I think, more than anything. But then in retrospect, all the times I felt most alive and most fulfilled with painting, it's been because there's a lot of people around me that I look up to, and I think you want to be in an environment where you're just trying to be in the cool kids club. Like with Razel, I just wanted to be like with Bill and Shay, and with college, I just wanted Tad to say good job and Fred to say good job, and I think that's all I'm ever looking for, is like acceptance into a cool kids club. And so when I started painting murals, I didn't care if it got 6 likes or 6 million likes. I would look for 3 names. I wanted like Junk House to like it. I wanted like Art Time Joe to like it. I wanted Six Coin to like it. And if they liked it, it was a success. And if I didn't see their names, it was garbage. Like I just wanted to be part of the club, and that's all I cared about. And to this day, that's kind of how I like think, is like I wanted go well and I want everyone to like it, but I want my favorite painters to like it. And if they like it, then I feel good. And I feel like I'm part of a club. And if I never make money, if I never like get past that, as long as like the game I'm playing in my head where my new goal is like just get accepted by this person, this group, this like, I just want to be allowed entry into a space, and not feel like I'm not enough for it. And I never want to feel like I'm like done. I think there's a real depression that sets in if you think you've like succeeded. So
Now, just to back up a little bit, so you were talking about when you were doing that ditch digging job and how you would make drawings every night. Just out of curiosity, what kind of things were you drawing?
just reference photos for the most part. Like I think I've never stopped trying to be better at drawing. I still do attempts at photorealism. When I was in school, I did like attempts at hyperrealism with painting where I'd like project and grid and color match, and it was always like this thing in the back burner for me where like I wanted it not to dictate how I felt about myself, so I felt like I needed to be really competent at it so I could like get past it. And so when I was in college, it'd be like, I remember there was like they were all watercolors, and they'd be usually portraits, but it'd be like Bruce Lee or like it was these random drawings, but whatever I felt like drawing that night, whatever photo I saw that I thought was interesting from a website, I just print out and do a watercolor. But that was it. There was no thoughts to it. It was just trying to keep my hand moving.
And so then when you got to Korea, you were talking about doing the same thing. I mean, Korea or any Asian country is going to be radically different in terms of the things that you see every day. And so I'm curious, I mean, obviously that's got to be impactful in the same way that you were saying, like, I like Gustin or I like the heroes, or the mythology. Everyone comes to Korea with a different kind of experience or learning epiphany. And just out of curiosity, what were some things about being there that were impactful for you?
Well, obviously the street art, they were much more indebted to character-based graffiti. They had letter graffiti that was like, you could tell their source was like 1980s New York and all of that, but they had a ton of character people who were like, they were identifiable by their style of what kind of characters they made and how they rendered them, and I think obviously that had a huge impact. If you look at Junk House's work, Junk House was really important to me, and Art Time Joe was like probably the most commercially successful muralist out there at the time, and you can see the way he builds light and shadow is not so dissimilar to the way I do. And then I think culturally I was just like super interested in like their folk art and I live pretty close to Andong, which is sort of like the cultural capital where they do like the traditional mask dancing ceremonies, and I was really into like their designs and really into like their history, and I think all of that plays a part. Especially with my early work, people used to ask me if I had like a Aztec influence or something. There was something like reminiscent to people about that, and I'm sure that's in there somewhere, but I think a lot of what people were seeing was like Korean mask shapes and Korean like traditional like wood carvings and stuff, and it was just maybe not as close to the Western mind as like obviously something that's on our continent. But yeah, I think they were majorly influential, and I've like rigorously tried to like mutate it and grow from it and not be just taking it directly, because like I was very much just a visitor in Korea, and it's not something I'd be super. I don't want my work to look like I'm just copying Korean masks, but it was a huge influence. Their artists, their contemporary artists specifically, were huge, and everything. I think in general, East Asia sort of like validates illustration in a different way. So you see it everywhere, in front of like a barbecue shop, in front of like, pop-up anythings. And so I think it probably unconsciously made me feel comfortable thinking a cartoon could go on any wall. Like I was just like, yeah, why wouldn't it be a big bright cartoon? That's exactly what I want to put there.
And so when you were there in Korea, you were talking about meeting people and going out and painting. So how much of, I'm asking this as somebody who has no idea, what is that kind of interaction like? Like, do you guys go out with a suitcase full of paint and find a wall and then start working on something? Like, how does that work?
It was varied. This was before I really got into spray paint. So I would go with a quart of white paint,
okay,
a quart of black paint, maybe 1 quart of a chromatic, and then I would go with these really dense pigment things you could get there, where like the pigment that you usually put in like a gallon of paint that you see at Home Depot, they'll shoot that just into this like shot glass for you.
Okay.
And so you have that and you have all your cups. And so it's not too heavy, and you can go out there and you can suddenly mix using white as your base or your chromatic and build all these different colors you want. So it was cool, but it was like very different than how I work now, because you have to wait for things to dry, and it was just a lot slower and a little more like clunkier. I think, some of it's romantic because it does look a little more like, I don't know, you work so hard to get a polish and then you miss the pieces that look unpolished sometimes. But we'd paint on, there were legal walls in certain places where you could paint after 10 p.m. or something. And then we'd paint in abandoned buildings. Korea had this like extreme growth, right? From 1953 being the lowest economy in the recognized world to being in the G20 by the 90s. So they would knock down apartment buildings that were built in the 80s that were already out of date for what they could do and build new ones. And so they'd cover like 4 city blocks for demolition, and it'd just be this abandoned city in this little area for 6 months. And so it would just get covered in graffiti, and it'd become like we painted inside like abandoned churches and all these cool locations, and we got to really like have a lot of fun. There were some like slightly more I guess dangerous pieces or illegal pieces, but in general they were like quiet, disregarded buildings, and it made sense because I couldn't paint fast with brush paint. Although I was doing a lot of simple stuff back then, I would take just watered down black paint and do just single line art sort of on walls, and but it was fun. It was such an exciting time because I felt like I was really excited about this style, but the style I didn't know where it was going or what it would be, and so you were just trying to like get out as much as possible to remember what excited you last time so you could put it into the next one, and it felt like you were working with like a bubbling pot of something. Like it was like marinating and growing, and you didn't want to like wait at all. You wanted to get it out while it was there because maybe you'd lose it all.
Now, did you feel like when you were there in Korea, was there a community? I mean, I know you were talking about meeting up individually with different artists there. Were there people that you would meet with as a large group? Were there parties or openings? I'm curious how that worked.
Yeah, there was this one guy, I'm trying to remember his name. He wore a bunny mask for all photos. But he was like, he would have these huge shows. I think his name was The Jack, but he was like commercially pretty successful with like graphic design things. He had like done some things for major firms, but he was into whatever you want to call what style this is, street style or lowbrow or whatever. But he'd collect a lot of us and have these like big shows at these spaces, and he always invited me. There was also like an experimental art space called Kuku in Gangnam, and I met someone who like hooked me up with the main guy for there, and I live painted one night, and it was the first time I ever like painted large scale in this new style, and it was like I had painted like a Hegel quote or something, but it was I had like a dinosaur sitting on the chest of a man who was labeled the present, and the dinosaur was labeled history or something. He was like eating them or something. It was still very much like I work as an illustrator and I'm making like an extremely literal illustration of this quote. But it went well, and so he invited me back a lot, and I think that was huge for me getting like reps in and also getting like a cosign to I felt like someone liked it. And after that I hopped around Asia after I let my contract up with the school and the magazine, and I went to Vietnam and painted there a lot, painted in Cambodia, painted in Thailand, painted at my first like graffiti jam. It was called Meeting of Styles, and was surrounded by these painters who were like just millions of leagues above me, a lot of which still are. But like Alex Marty was there, and he goes by Alex Face, but he incredible painter. He's in galleries all over the world with his work, and but so that was cool. Like it was cool to see just how deep this scene goes and how far there is to like climb. And I think graffiti was this combination of things that I always felt disparate, where I was like, in school I wanted to be conceptually good, I wanted the product to look good, but for some reason I felt weird attaching craft to it, even though it needed a polish. It was somehow separate. Spray paint, once I started using that, I was like, no matter what the design is, spray paint requires your concentration. It is disorderly without focus. So it was a way to tie this like craft fetishism to whatever concept you were doing, to where they felt like they like worked together again. Also in graffiti, so like if you can't paint straight lines, if you can't paint good letters, it doesn't matter what ideas you have or concepts you have, the community won't respect you very much. Like if you come straight from school and you never learn how to do like a graffiti letter, you have trouble like getting so I think it was a cool middle pot of porridge for me, where like it was in between art school and like me trying to be like a Renaissance illustrator. Like
well, I mean, as I'm listening to you talk, I mean, I'm really struck by how you were talking about going from high school. I mean, obviously we've covered a lot of ground, but you were talking about going from high school where you were sort of this outsider, and then sort of finding your way to this arts high school, and then going to MCA, and going from the small town in Mississippi to the larger town in Mississippi, and then to Memphis, and then suddenly to go from Memphis to Korea. I mean, that's a massive, particularly gutsy move in terms of thinking about 15-year-old Birdcap. I mean, that's such a huge transition. I mean, even as a 54-year-old, the thought of moving to Korea is terrifying, And so, like, listening to you talk about it, I'm really struck by the thing that happened in between that 16-year-old Michael and the Michael that ran off to Korea for 4 years. What do you think? What was it that made you able to do that? I mean, that's like a superpower.
I think it's the same energy as going to the high school. I think anytime I've like jumped, it's paid off, and so I don't have a lesson in me where like it doesn't.
Right.
And so like I think I've been obviously extremely fortunate where like I've been able to risk a lot. When I left Korea, I lived in a van for a couple years, and like I traveled throughout the nation painting like free to very low cost murals anywhere I could, and I thought of it as like Johnny Appleseed. I was just going to get my work everywhere, and maybe one of them would email me back, one city. But I've been lucky to have good health, and I've been lucky to, both my parents are gone now, but they were never sick for long periods of time or anything. There was never a moment where like someone depended on me, and I yeah, I think it's easy to be barreling and sort of like risk taking when the risk doesn't impact anyone else. Like I was able to be extremely selfish with my risks because I've just been a bit lucky.
But also, I mean, not to contradict you, but I think not just selfish, but also really sort of brave. I mean, in like you being able to make these decisions and being able to do these moves are really striking to me.
Well, maybe it's brave because I never thought it was brave. I'd probably get scared if I thought it. Like, in my mind, I had nothing to lose. Like, I'm from Escatawba, Mississippi. What is there to lose by trying to go somewhere larger? What's there to lose by getting out of Mississippi? I can always go back. What's there to lose leaving a construction job as a ditch digger? I'm sure I'll get my same wage back if I come back in a year. And so, like, I think I was also very lucky in that, and I think a lot of people don't have this, but if I ruined every chance I had, if I got kicked out of Korea or lost everything in the world I had, I could stay at my dad's for 3 weeks. Like, I had a father who had a stable house, who always had a bed open for me. I never really used it, but psychologically, that's a huge net. It's not like he could send me money, but he could. The worst that can happen is I'm at my dad's house. That's different than being homeless. Even when I like lived in my van, it was easy because it was a choice. I wasn't stuck to my van. I could go home. I could get a job. I wanted to do something fantastically stupid, which was like be a full-time artist. And more than that, be one that doesn't compromise about anything I want to make. If you like contact me and we start talking about a job and I decide I don't want to paint ketchup bottles, I just don't do it. And and I would have like $30 in the bank. Like, no, I want only difficult, selfish work. And I think it's not so impressive as much as it is like, it's impressive that my father made me feel that safe, that I could risk a lot. And I'm thankful for him for many reasons. But when I was going to go to MCA, I think it was like a tough week. There was the bottom of my shoe fell off. I had like $10 in the bank. I lost my ID, and my truck broke down or something. My dad used to bring up this email all the time, so I've kind of like memorized it. But he told me something to the point of, I'd never tell you can't go to art school. But if you want to do something that you know is uphill and difficult and unlikely to be secure, you're not allowed to complain, because you had every option to do something a lot safer, and you had a lot of like Mississippi schools that could teach you real crafts, and you can always be secure. You're choosing to not be secure, so you can't complain if you choose that. And I think that was really great information.
Michael, that is such a good. I think that's such a great place to pause, because I know you have places to go.
I've got a little time, but we can pause if you want.
Yeah, let's pause there.
And that was the first of 2 interviews that I did with Michael Roy, aka Birdcap. That interview that you just listened to was recorded on December 20th, 2024. Please join us next week when we have the second of 2 interviews with Michael Roy. Until then, thank you again for listening.